Hello, everyone. Good evening. This is Eric, and it's such a pleasure for me and Ai-men to share about Doublethink Lab's 2022 Hong Kong Diaspora project. And first of all, as the project manager of this project, I would like to introduce my beloved colleagues, Ai-men Lau, and also Yazoo Zhong. Lovely. So when talk about the background of this project, some people may ask, why Hong Kong and why now? I believe not only because of the Hong Konger shares very similar values and desire about and faith about democratic system and also freedom and human rights with Taiwanese people. We also commonly face same threats and challenge from a same dictatorship, which is CCP. And why now? Because I think when back to 2019, Hong Kong movement reached its peak and immediately facing a significant challenge from NSL. So I think after 2 years now, 2022, it is very important for us to explore and analyze the impact that caused by NSL. And because as what he said, is not only restrict the freedom of speech of the people who are still in Hong Kong, but also it brings significant impact to the global citizen around the world. And for this project, Doublethink Lab is trying to explore different perspectives regarding Hong Kong affairs, and more specifically to Hong Kong overseas activists. The first of all is we would like to explore their information environment and the disinformation they are currently facing in their resident countries. And also would like them to share about their observation about the local Hong Kong diaspora community, about their media habits and their the disinformation and propaganda they are currently facing. And also we would like to explore what kind of threats and harassment that for these overseas Hong Kong activists and Hong Kong organizations are commonly facing. And also based on the elements I mentioned previously, we also would like to figure out what kind of current challenge that for Hong Kong movement and also for Hong Kong activists and organizations they are facing, and what kind of intervention and what kind of capacity building Doublethink Lab can provide.
So for the participants, in total 21 participants were recruited for this project. All 21 are Hong Kongers who are currently living overseas. Obviously, we wanted to do a risk assessment and chose those living overseas and who currently work on affairs related to Hong Kong. They came from a wide array of countries, including the United States, Germany, Canada, United Kingdom, Australia, Japan, and Taiwan. It should be noted that not all participants that we interviewed are active within the Hong Kong democracy movement. Some are actually working at organizations helping to resettle Hong Kongers who move abroad or preserving and promoting Hong Kong culture. Participants hailed from different ideologies, perspectives, and backgrounds. So for the methodology of the report, this consisted of a questionnaire and a qualitative one-on-one interview. To protect identities of participants, each participant was assigned a randomly generated code. The code was then applied to all data. We did not retain any document that can directly link the identity of participants. Additionally, we developed a code book for data analysis, and all coding was done on Atlas software. And we wrote short notes, me and Eric, of personal observations of each of the qualitative interview. That was about an hour of emotional reactions and any impressive aspects. So we're going to go to key findings.
Yeah, so now I'd like to share some of the key findings from the questionnaire section. Sorry. Yeah. So first of all, when we talk about their observation on diaspora's media information habits, according to the chart, you can see that online news and online key opinion leader, or AKA online influencer, and the social media and online forum are the most common type of platform for them to receive their information. There are all more than 80% of participants report this kind of observation. And also about the language of these media, as you can see, Cantonese is still the most comfortable language for most of the diaspora community. And when we talk about whether you think disinformation is a really critical situation in your resident country, you can see around 52.5% of people say yes, it is really critical and significant. But it also has more than 45% of participants think it's currently not a really significant issue in their resident country. And when we talk about the what kind of platform contain the most of disinformation, as you can see, key opinion leader (KOL) and also the online influencer and social media and online forum, and also the messaging groups such as like a WhatsApp or Line group, still being reported as contain quite lots of disinformation information. And when talk about the propaganda, it seems similar with disinformation. KOL, social media, online forum, and also messaging app still contribute a lot. But as you can see, online news seems to have a really high percentage as well, which is 76.2%. And when talk about the language difference between disinformation and propaganda relate to Hong Kong affair, as you can see, disinformation mainly are Cantonese and Chinese. However, when we look at the propaganda, Chinese suddenly become overwhelming more common than other type of language. And now let's move to the threats and harassment that our participants faced. So when asking whether they've been harassed or facing threats based on their advocacy or based on their ideology against PRC or Hong Kong government, more than 95% of participants report they have this kind of experience being threatened and harassed. And based on this chart, you can found the form of threats and harassment that they face previously or currently. The most common one are being physically tracked and also receiving harassing and threatening message or phone call. And the other one is receiving threats and harassment on the spot or protest and the advocacy activity. Yeah. No.
So we're going on to interview findings. So when asked, we had participants expand upon their observations and thoughts about Chinese influence in mainstream and overseas Chinese language media. So there was varying levels among participants, and rather than exerting direct pressure on overseas media, participants noted that it seemed to be more covert through financial incentives and advertising. There's also, this is an issue as overseas Chinese diaspora rely mainly on Chinese language media. So notably, our Germany answers were quite interesting and unique from the rest of our other participants. It was overwhelmingly noted that German media and German public opinion held a positive view of China and the CCP. And this positive view has changed the definition and understanding of pro-CCP propaganda. There is a very strong anti-American sentiment among the German media and social media, which in turn exploits and increases distrust of the West among German society. And this could also increase susceptibility to disinformation, particularly state media disinformation. Whataboutism was a primary tactic observed by participants to deflect away from criticism of the CCP. There was also noted that Germany had produced documentaries with favorable narratives of the CCP in China, and there's also an existing left-wing bias that was noted by some participants as well. So then we asked, who did participants think might be behind threats and harassments? And participants suspected various CCP-affiliated organizations from all over the world having significant influence behind the threats and harassments. So for example, embassies was one that was noted, Chinese embassies. It was also noted that it's actually very, very difficult to gather concrete evidence that these CCP-affiliated organizations and institutions had a role in the threats and harassments. But it is a common tactic deployed with surveillance of the overseas Hong Kong community. And as well, local Chinese student societies have been known to cooperate with Chinese embassies. WeChat was also noted by participants as having a very significant role in threats and harassments of organizing counter-protests, contacting and connection with the local Chinese embassies. Surveillance, doxing of personal information happened on WeChat, and there was a significant role in influencing Chinese diaspora overseas to attend counter-protests or engage in harassment, so through peer pressure or incentives like getting a free lunch or something like that. So we asked participants to talk about the impact of mental health and personal life with the threats and harassments and continuing on advocacy. So there is a high level of paranoia. There's a psychological impact of surveillance and foreign intimidation. People have noted of who did the doxing. So there was Hong Kong, HK Leak, the Hong Kong government, and PRC officials. Destruction of personal social life. So a lot of activists and a lot of participants have noted that they had to cut ties with family members, with friends, with social connections. And there is a level of distrust. And there's no sense of direction for help, especially with mental health. Government and policies. Participants had noted that there is a lot of uncertainty across the world in terms of immigration and visa affairs, in terms of asylum policies, and helping to social resettlement policies as well. And more participants hoped to see addressing foreign CCP influence in the resident country becoming a priority. Finally, we came on to challenges of the Hong Kong movement. Burnout is significant. It is huge. It has become the pressing issue and challenge for the pro-democracy Hong Kong movement. We had 12 participants report high levels of burnout within the Hong Kong diaspora. Reasons for burnout varied. However, overall, they were related to advocacy and leaving Hong Kong. So 2 participants had noted those who recently moved overseas were still grappling with PTSD from the 2019 protests. Others noted that burnout has also been related to significant uncertainty of where the movement might go in the future, significant stress of personal relationships, and the stress of moving to a new country. Participants have also pointed to burnout stemming from other challenges, such as lack of resources, financial means, and a lack of overseas advocacy experience. Another massive challenge is the lack of advocacy and NGO experience. This exacerbates a number of existing challenges, including utilizing readily available resources. So for example, not knowing really how to write a grant for a proposal, and such as funding. And this can further exacerbate other issues like burnout and internal conflicts. And this has given rise to quite a toxic cycle of challenges that we have to further contend with. Another one is the lack of NGO experience that has become a barrier to effective advocacy, as many Hong Kong organizations grapple with the fundamental of NGO operations in another country. This is just our conclusion, key findings of things that we've found. So again, just to summarize everything, Hong Kong diaspora community has displayed a higher preference of obtaining information from online influencers and self-media. One thing that we had noted as a common narrative in disinformation reported by quite a few participants was discrediting the Hong Kong movement, undermining the unity between overseas Hong Kongers and local communities, and exaggerating and distorting negative facts about life overseas for Hong Kongers. There was raising concerns about online influencers and their roles in spreading disinformation from both the pro-democracy and pro-establishment camps, and again, highlighting the uniqueness of Germany and the interesting findings out of that. And then as well as noting that the Chinese diaspora community still mainly relies on PRC state media and Chinese domestic social media, which leaves them highly susceptible to disinformation and propaganda. And you know what, I think in the interest of time, this is summarizing everything that we did talk about, so we'll move on and we'll go to the conclusion. So we need There's a need to increase countermeasures and fact-checking capabilities among the community, especially post-national security law. The risk of doxing and destruction of personal relationships is a huge challenge, as well as internal conflicts, limited financial and human resources, operational challenges, and burnout. Governments and civil society should take into consideration a more holistic approach for support for overseas Hong Kong communities and organizations. So what have we done?
Not yet, I'm very. So thank Ai-men for demonstrating our key findings from our research. So based on this key finding, Doublethink Lab has developed a series of training in order to deal with this kind of challenge. So early last month, we conducted our first stage of training, which is a 3-day training. And the first day was about the tools and skills about digital investigation skills. And the second day was about the digital security for most of the Hong Kong organization or Hong Kong activists they may face. And also the day 3 was about the theories about identifying the disinformation, misinformation, and also about the information operation, and also about the CIB, which is the coordinated inauthentic behavior. And it is delightful for me to announce that Doublethink Lab will provide a second stage of training early next year. And this time will be a more consistent and more practical skills regarding based on what we found in the research. So the first one, we are trying to focusing on the skills of NPO and NGO management skills. And also we're trying to provide trainings about how to establish your target audience and how to manage your communicational strategy. And also what is important is about the strategy to protect against physical and psychological threats and harassment, and also include a training about the recovering of mental and traumatic experience of your advocacy or your back to the movement. And also what we think is really interesting is we are also trying to, through our training, to explore the possibility of applying like a virtual currency in order to provide a management skills of the overseas financial asset. So, yeah. So Hong Kongers are not giving up, and so as Doublethink Lab won't give up our support to Hong Kongers. Thank you. So, any questions?
Sure.
Yes.
I'm puzzled by, and probably I misunderstood, the criteria where it was an even split on the view of whether there was disinformation or not in the country of the respondent. What's that all about? I mean, obviously, there's a huge amount of disinformation in Chinese media, so why would people think that there isn't disinformation?
I think that question was whether or not the impact of disinformation in their view was significant in their country. So rather than whether or not there was a high level of disinformation, it's more so whether or not that impact has really taken a hold in that resident country. That was the question.
Yeah, exactly. I think people all commonly agreed with that disinformation happens a lot in their country, but they won't actually say information bring a lot of impacts to their country currently.
So it sounds like they're deceiving themselves about I mean, if you're consuming disinformation all day long, it's bound to have an impact, don't you think?
I think as well, this is from a specific perspective, but it is varied across country and country context, especially among public. So for example, like how much does disinformation impact Canadian society versus German society versus United Kingdom or Japan or Australia? So there's varying levels of the impact itself.
Following the question here. Can you say, talk a little bit about the question you're asking in terms of disinformation? Is it just questions and whether you've experienced disinformation or whether see disinformation or you got few case studies and ask them to say whether they've seen that or not. The other question, well, it struck me when you're doing presentation, and this might not be a question that you'll be able to answer. When we talk about asylum, we always, especially in Taiwan, worry that the person who are applying for asylum is not really the ones who are in need. Sometimes they might be what we call 鬼啊, right? So this is another question, probably to you, is what are the criteria when you are selecting those 40-something interviews? Is there any selection criteria, or is it just by reference, snowballing? Thank you.
Yeah, so basically when we asking about whether you think disinformation is critical in your resident country, in a questionnaire, it was just simply one question, because at that point, this project is not aiming for having quantitative data. This questionnaire is more like a starting point for us to figure out what kind of interview online, what kind of strategy we're going to conduct our interview in a later stage. So yes.
For the second question, we use purposive sampling, and we use references. So those who we contacted we had a known list, and we contacted them, and then they recommended other folks for us. The question on the asylum, that's not just something that was restricted to one particular country. It's something that's a global phenomenon. So it is an issue globally that we have varying levels of immigration and asylum measures for Hong Kongers.
Thanks for your presentation. So I've got a question that comes up from your earlier remark that a lot of the news consumption is very much reliant on a PRC produced or PRC affiliated kinds of media, and also key opinion leaders. So there's a demand side question here, right? So what, I mean, you can't go around debunking everything. So what sort of alternatives are there, or can there be developed, right, to meet that demand for news in Sinophone languages?
Well, our training was to help build up capacity in terms of media literacy and fact-checking, to build those sort of, I think, to build those countermeasures. But I do think that there has to be a larger discussion about online key opinion leaders specifically, that, you know, we have to talk about how YouTube is now playing a huge role in disinformation, and how we need to kind of shift the discourse on that, and talk about and include that in media literacy education. We have to be more thinking a bit ahead of the curve on that. But I think one thing that is important is, again, we need to be building up fact-checking among the community. And there is a reliance on self-media, speaking from just a personal observation, because there was such a distrust in mainstream media among the Hong Kong community that emerged from, you know, the protests and from a long time of the movement. There was this sort of reliance on self-media, which is where a lot of the information was coming out of, that people trusted. That, again, is a very important caveat, but we need to also be critical if there is disinformation as well.
I just want to add that, because one of the issues that I can foresee coming up is that if there's going to be fact-checking, all the sort of stuff that comes out in familiar languages tend to be problematic. All those that are not, right, tend to be, oh, this is where you get their facts from. That can become a real obstacle to convincing people that they need to sort of look at you know, more and more varied sources of information.
One more question, and then I think we have time.
One guy, sorry.
Hi, Albert Zhang from ASPI. My question was about sort of Hong Kong identity, and you know, a lot of these interviewers you spoke to are sort of living outside of Hong Kong now. I was just wondering if you had any insights about what their thoughts about sort of the suppression of Hong Kong and maybe broader Cantonese identity, and maybe there are some things you could recommend what governments could do to sort of preserve that?
I'm not sure if I answer your question properly or not, but I think for quite lots of participants mentioned about in order to deal with the current challenge of their advocacy work, they found to localize their topics in their resident country is really important. I think it also helps us to understand that for the identity, for exile Hong Konger, not only should keep about the integrity of being a Hong Konger, we also need to think about other more local elements. And also because of, probably we didn't include in this slide, but there's one kind of disinformation strategy is really successful, is the localized version of disinformation. So for example, they were specifically criticizing or creating disinformation about local Hong Kong organization, for example, in London or in different cities, and in order to break the unity of the community. So I think if we reverse this strategy, that we'll be able to cope with this kind of problem.
Just to quickly add, I think also that's a question and something Hong Kongers are grappling with in continuing on the movement is the preservation of the Hong Kong identity and a lot of language preservation initiatives. I know that there has been a lot of attempts to connect with Save Cantonese, for example, Save Cantonese Stanford and in the States, and to build up more initiatives to teach Cantonese. Lots of film festivals coming out, a lot of art exhibitions, things like that. So there is, now I think there is more of a thoughtful effort to talk about how do we preserve Hong Kong identity and Hong Kong culture as well.
I think that's all. Thank you.